Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Simply Spectacular Summer Cupcakes. Today we have Tiffany Smith as our instructor. She has been teaching cake decorating for over 20 years, and she's got some really cute cupcakes to show you. Either join with us or you can just watch today and do this with the recording that will be posted tomorrow. So Tiffany, go ahead.
Okay, hello everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today, and thank you, Michaels, for giving me the opportunity to be here. I'm just going to show you what we're going to be doing today. Today is all about cupcakes. If you can just go ahead and switch my camera for the close-up. Thanks. So this is what we're going to be doing. All of these cupcakes are iced in buttercream, and what I'm going to do is take you through a couple of fun alternative ways to ice your cupcakes with an icing pouch instead of the typical spatula way. And then the decorations that you see on here are all made out of fondant. So I'm going to take you through some of the basics of working with fondant and some tips and tricks that will help make you a little more comfortable working with it if you've never worked with it before. I'll take you through how to make this fun confetti, and I'll show you how you can customize the colors of your confetti to match your party theme, and then we'll add a few little curlicues to it. And what's summer without bugs, right? So I've got some cute little bugs. I'll show you how to make the leaf that the ladybug is sitting on. We'll do the ladybug and this adorable little caterpillar. And then finally, we'll do what we'll call our ice cream oops. And when it's time to break out the sprinkles for the ice cream, I'm actually gonna also show you how to core a cupcake so you can fill it with sprinkles. We all know how much fun it is to have a cupcake with sprinkles on top, but it's way more fun to actually have the sprinkles inside the cupcake because no one's really expecting that, right? So hang in there. We're going to be together for about 45 minutes to an hour, and that'll be the last thing that I show you. So let's talk about these icing pouches first. This is what we're going to use to ice the cupcakes with. These come in a variety of different colors at Michaels, and the first thing you want to do is make sure that you knead your pouch a little bit, because just like any other kind of buttercream, if it's sitting for a long period of time, the icing can start to separate a little bit, and you might get some liquid that kind of pulls out of it. So just knead it for about 30 seconds or so. Now let me show you how this works. If you take the storage cap off, you're going to find that there is a round tip attached. This is really good for piping a message on a cake or doing little dots or outlining. Then if you unscrew that, there is a built-in star tip. I don't know if you can see that well in the camera. And this is the tip that we're actually going to be using to do our cupcakes today. Now, let's say that you want to pipe something that would require a tip other than either the round or the star tip. No worries, Wilton has you covered. This is just a standard metal tip. Michael sells these separately. You could actually attach any of the Wilton standard tips as long as you have a coupler ring, and these are still compatible. So this is actually a leaf tip, so you could actually use this tip on the pouch as well. So what we're going to start with is our confetti cupcake, and you can see here that I've piped a bunch of rosettes on it. So that's what we're going to start with. Just take your pouch and hold it straight up with the tip a little bit off the surface, and you're just going to start squeezing and kind of rotate around the star. And you'll just kind of keep going around the whole cupcake with that. Just make sure that you stop squeezing the bag to end it before you pull the tip away. And you want to try to use your whole arm when you go to rotate. Don't just use your wrist or your hand. So we're just going to cover the whole cupcake here with rosettes. For those of you that maybe have never used a decorating bag and a tip before, these icing pouches are a great way to kind of get your feet wet because they're mess-free. A lot of times when people first go to use a regular decorating bag, if you don't hold it just right, icing can scoot out the back end of the bag. But with these icing pouches, the back of the bag is sealed, so the icing is only going to come out on the tip end. All right, so I've got all of the rosettes there. We're actually going to go back and add another layer of rosettes because you can never have enough icing on a cupcake, right? And what I'm doing is placing the second layer sort of in between the previous ones. Don't place them directly on top of the previous layer. So there we have our rosette cupcake. Are there any questions on the icing pouches or doing rosettes before we dive into fondant?
We don't have anything posted yet.
Okay, well, we will move right on then. So let's talk a little bit about fondant. You can actually make your fondant from scratch if you want, or you can buy it already made. This is what the packaging looks like at Michael's. This is your standard size box of fondant. It's a 24-ounce box. You could also get smaller packs that are pre-colored. So this is a 4-pack of colors. We're actually going to be using a couple colors out of this neon variety pack today. If you buy it white, you can actually add your own color to it with icing colors, which I'll be showing you how to do in a bit. Just a couple things you want to keep in mind when you first go to use the fondant. You want to make sure that you have some plastic wrap handy, because when you open up your fondant, as soon as it's exposed to air, it's going to start to dry out. So you're just going to take the small amount that you want to work with, and then you're going to wrap the rest up in plastic wrap like I have here. Something else you want to keep in mind is fondant attracts a lot of lint and dirt, so it's real important to start out with clean hands, and you want a nice clean work surface. I actually have what's called a roll and cut mat that I am working on today. This is available at Michael's. What I like about this is it's so easy to wipe clean when you're done because it's a non-stick surface that helps protect the counter when I'm cutting the fondant. If you can't get your hands on a roll and cut mat, you can always just use a large cutting board or a silicone mat. Something else to keep in mind is try not to wear big fuzzy sweaters. Hopefully no one's needing to wear a sweater at this time of the year, but a lot of times the fibers from the sweater somehow find their way into the fondant, and it's real hard to get that out once it's in there. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to show you how you can adjust the color of pre-colored fondant. So I've got some neon pink here that we're actually going to just tone down the color a little bit because I wanted a lighter pink for the color palette that I'm working with. So I'm just going to cut a little bit off. And again, we want to roll this back up into our plastic wrap so it doesn't dry out. And then I'm going to take a little bit of the white. And then I'm just going to start to mix these together. So you're kind of just pulling and folding and twisting until it's all blended in. And this should give us a lighter shade of pink. Once you get it all blended in, you might find that it's still not quite the shade that you want. Maybe you want to go a tiny bit lighter. You would just add a little more white fondant to it. So this method is really good if you want to do like an ombre effect with maybe 4 or 5 different shades of pink. You would just vary the amounts of white fondant that you're adding to the pink. So that looks pretty good. Something else you're going to want to make sure that you have on hand when you go to start working with your fondant always make sure you have some cornstarch or some powdered sugar, because when you go to roll out your fondant, you need to dust your surface so the fondant does not stick. So I actually have some cornstarch in this little gadget here. This is called a Dust and Store pouch. This is available at Michael's. You just twist off the lid and you can add your cornstarch or powdered sugar. Put the lid back on, and then this gray rim unscrews. And there we have our little dusting pouch. So you can just kind of tap your surface and the perfect amount of powder will come out. I recommend using the Dust and Store pouch rather than just trying to sprinkle the powder on your surface with your hand, because you're going to get a nice fine coating with this pouch versus trying to sprinkle it on with your hands. If you use too much powder on the surface, it just gets soaked up by the fondant and the fondant will dry out and it just gets a little harder to work with. So what we're going to do next is roll out our pink fondant to cut out our confetti. And what I have here is a 9-inch fondant roller. This is made specifically to roll out fondant or gum paste. You could always use just a regular size rolling pin. I really like this smaller size to work with when I'm working with such a small amount of fondant. It's just easier to see what I'm doing. The best part of this type of rolling pin, though, is these little guide rings here. So when you're working with fondant, sometimes you need your fondant rolled out a little bit thicker. Sometimes you want it super thin. These guide rings will help you achieve the perfect size thickness. So we want our fondant pretty thin for all of the things that we're going to be making today. If you just have a regular rolling pin, you're going to want to make sure that you're rolling out your fondant about a 1/16 of an inch thick. So that's pretty thin. And these guide rings are the perfect measurement for a 1/16 of an inch. So I don't even have to worry about grabbing my ruler. So to roll it out, you just kind of use this back and forth motion and try to keep your fondant inside the area where your guide rings are so you don't get guide ring tracks on your fondant if you roll over it. So that looks like a nice even thickness there. Another thing, don't pick up your fondant and flip it over. You can kind of pick it up and rotate it if you need to, but you don't want to be flipping it over. So that's all set for us. What we're going to do to cut out the confetti is I'm going to be using this mini cutout set. It actually comes with 3 different round cutters. I'm going to be using the middle size today. You could actually kind of mix it up and use all 3 sizes if you want to. It's really up to whatever look that you want. So I'm just going to use this almost like a regular cookie cutter and just press down, and then you'll see that it's stuck inside here. It comes off real easy by just pressing the little button at the top. So we're gonna just punch out a whole bunch of these, and you'll notice that I'm kind of giving the cutter a little bit of a twist with each circle that I'm cutting out here. So I think you get the idea there. And then for the ones that don't get stuck in your cutter, they kind of stay right here with the fondant, you can kind of very carefully get them out with a spatula. Just be careful handling them because they are going to stay pretty soft. That's why I like to use this tapered spatula instead of my fingers. If you go to try to pick it up with your fingers, you might distort the shape a little bit. So I think you get the idea there. I actually have some other colors already made up. So I'm just going to take these and sprinkle them on our cupcake here. The great thing about working with fondant is that you can actually do all of your decorations in fondant ahead of time. Whoops. And then just worry about making the cupcakes the day of and placing your decorations on top just before your party. And as long as your cupcake is freshly iced, these should kind of just sit on here just like that. So there we have our confetti. And next I'm going to show you how you can do the little curlicues to add. It just really helps to scream celebration when you add the curlicues. So now I'm going to be using some of the turquoise fondant from the neon pack. And again, we just want to keep this wrapped up so it doesn't dry out. And before we go to roll this out, we just want to make sure that we knead it a little bit. When you kind of go to pull it apart, it should stretch a little bit without breaking. That's when you know that it's soft and pliable enough to work with. And we'll just dust our surface. And again, we're going to use the pink guide rings to make sure that we get a nice even thickness of 1/16 of an inch. And then what we're going to do is cut little strips for our curlicues. And what I'm going to be using is a fondant trimmer. This is available at Michael's. It looks a lot like a pizza cutter or a pastry wheel, which you could use that as well. But I like the trimmer because it actually comes with 2 different size wheels. And for what we're going to be doing today, I like to use the small one. The larger wheel is good if you're cutting a large amount of fondant that tends to be on the thicker side. And that's good for just doing straight lines. If you've got like a real quirky shape that you need to cut around, the smaller wheel works a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is just kind of trim off the end because I want a nice clean cut there. And you can go as wide or as thin with your strips that you want. And since we're just working on a cupcake, I'm going with pretty thin strips here. Doesn't matter how long they are or how short, you can always adjust that. And notice I'm working with a pretty small piece of fondant here. If we go with anything bigger than this, as we're making our curlicues, this is going to start to dry out. So just try not to break off too large of a piece to work with. What I'm going to do next is I'm taking a modeling stick. I know this looks a lot like a pencil. You don't ever want to use a pencil though because that's got lead in it and that wouldn't be good to come in contact with food. Michael's actually has these modeling sticks in a 2-pack. This is the thinner one, and then there's also a thicker one that comes in that set. So what I'm going to do is take my strip, and with one finger, I'm going to hold it against the modeling stick, and then I'm just going to kind of twirl this around. You want to keep it pretty loose, though. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to get it off. So what I'm going to do next is just slide it right on my cupcake. And you can kind of play with it because it's going to stay pretty soft, so it might have trouble keeping its shape. So you can kind of use the end of the modeling stick to kind of get it to curl how you want it. And then these just slide off like that. And that's all there is to it. Are there any questions, Karen, on making the confetti or the little curlicues?
We had a question about the confetti and how do you keep them from not sticking inside the cutter?
Well, it's okay if they do stick because of the little ejector that's on the top. You can just punch it out by pressing the ejector down.
Okay.
Okay, you could try to dust it with cornstarch or powdered sugar, but it's not really necessary because you've got the little ejector to just punch it right out if it does stick.
Okay, and then we've had several questions about how long will the fondant last when you've wrapped it in the plastic wrap when you're done, and does it need to be refrigerated?
Good question. So as long as you wrap it up tightly, It should last for several weeks. It doesn't really go bad so much. It's more that it will start to dry out a little bit. So you'll know when you go to work with leftover fondant, if you go to knead it and it's really dry and it seems to be cracking and it doesn't stretch, sort of, you know, this kind of stretches when you pull it like taffy. If your leftover fondant doesn't do that, then it's probably time for a new batch. You don't need to refrigerate it. I have had some people tell me that they freeze their fondant if they want to keep it for a really long period of time. I personally have never had a need to freeze my fondant because I tend to use my leftover fondant so quickly that it doesn't really matter. But like I said, you could get several weeks out of it as long as you wrap it tightly. And if you freeze it, you'll get even longer out of it. You just want to make sure that you bring it back out to room temperature and knead it well before you go to work with it after it's been frozen. Okay, any other questions before we move on to our Ladybug?
Nope.
Okay, well, moving right along then, we're going to do our Ladybug next, and I'm first going to show you how to do the icing swirl that I did for this cupcake. Again, we're going to use the star tip. This time I'm going to start with the tip in the center of the cupcake, and I'm just going to start squeezing and just kind of go around in a swirl. And again, I'm kind of using my whole arm here. Once you get to the outer edge, we're going to start to work our way back into the center of the cupcake again, just to give our cupcake a little more height. And there we have our swirl. So it's just a slightly different look from the rosettes. So what we're going to do next is our little leaf for our Ladybug to sit on. So I'm going to be using the green from the primary fondant variety pack. And as always, we just want to knead it up a little bit before we start to work with it. And then we're going to dust our surface again. And we're just going to roll this out. Again, if you don't have a fondant roller to have the guide rings to help you to know how thin or thick to roll it, you want to make sure it's about a 1/16 of an inch. And then what we're going to do to make our leaf shape is I have a leaf cutter set available at Michael's. So there's actually 6 different sizes here. We're going to use the largest one. And what is so cool about these cutters is that it's almost like having 12 in one, because if you notice, one side has the sort of ripple or wavy edge, and then the other side has the straight edge. So it just depends on what kind of look that you want. I happen to use just the straight edge for this particular leaf. So just press down, and again, I'm just giving it a little twist. It's just going to help you get a cleaner cut. And then you'll want to make sure that you put away your excess fondant so it doesn't dry out. And then what I'm going to do is just take my spatula, and I'm just going to give the leaf a little bit of a center vein. Just be careful you don't press too deep, or you'll end up cutting your leaf in half. So I don't know if you can see that, but I just kind of put a little imprint of my spatula in there to kind of give it that impression that there's a vein there. Now, if you notice, if I set that down, it looks pretty flat compared to the one that's on the cupcake, right? This one appears to have more definition. It's just kind of lifted in the back a little bit. Let me show you how I did that. Just take a napkin or a piece of paper towel, and if you bunch it up you can just put that underneath your leaf however you want it to curl. Actually, let me make this a little bit smaller. So as this sits out and starts to dry, it's going to keep its shape. So this is just helping to form that little lift there towards the back. And then you could stick another one here, and it just helps to give it more dimension and make your leaf look a little more lifelike. So I'm just going to set that aside to dry. Ideally, you'd really like this to dry like a good 24 hours, especially if you're dealing with a lot of heat and humidity. It's going to take a lot longer for your fondant to dry. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our actual Ladybug. So I'm going to use some of the red fondant from the primary pack.
Tiffany?
Yep.
We've had a request. Can you move where you're working forward just a little bit so it's more centered on the picture? Like right between the cupcakes is good.
Okay, is that good there?
Yes, that's
okay.
better. Thank you.
Yep. So again, I'm just kneading this up a little bit to get it soft. And then I wanted my Ladybug to really be in proportion with the leaf. So what I did was I made it about 5/8 of an inch. If you don't want to mess with those measurements, I can show you another easy way to know exactly how much fondant you'll need to make that size ball. So I'm actually going to take the orange cutter from that 6-piece set, and I'm going to roll out the fondant again. And again, 1/16 of an inch thick. Then if you use this cutter to cut a leaf, this amount of fondant is about what you'll need to get that 5/8 of an inch ball. So we're just going to roll this up with our hands. And there we have the body for our Ladybug. Now what I'm going to do is just, again, take my tapered spatula and just kind of put a little line down the center. And this is going to be where his wings kind of come together there. Okay. Now what we're going to do is give him his spots. And what I'm going to use to give him his spots is this food writer. Now I know this looks like a normal marker. You do not want to just grab whatever marker you have in your junk drawer or your craft supplies. This is actually a marker that is food safe, so it's perfect for your food crafting, and you don't want to use this on your other arts and crafts. You want to keep this specifically for your food decorating. So I'm just going to add, you could do like 3 or 4 dots on either side of that line that we just made. You know, if you're making a larger Ladybug, obviously you can add more dots. So there's his body. Next, what we're going to do is make his little black head here. And for that, I want to show you another way to color fondant. Now, what we could do is start with white and add black color, but that would take a little bit longer to mix in that color. So I'm actually starting out with some blue, and this blue is in the primary pack. So if we start with this color and add black to it, it's going to color black a lot quicker. So this is a nice method to use if you need a really super dark color. So I'm just going to break off the amount I need here. And then what I'm going to use to color it is this icing color. Obviously, you could use this to color your buttercream or royal icing. But you can certainly use it to color fondant. And the way you apply it is by just taking some out of the jar on a toothpick. So this is actually a gel consistency. It's different from those liquid squeeze bottles that you can find in your grocery store. You want to try to use the gel consistency when you're coloring fondant, because it's not going to change the consistency at all. If you use those liquid colors, it can make the fondant a little bit sticky. So it looks like I might need to add just a little more black to this. So I want to start with a new toothpick to grab more black. This way you're not going to contaminate your jar of color. As long as you always use a fresh toothpick, these colors will last for a good 24 months. You just want to make sure that you don't contaminate them. It's also a good idea when you're working with these dark colors. If you have food-safe gloves, you might want to mix your color in using the gloves, because these icing colors, it can get on your hand. Like you can see how my hand is getting a little black here. It'll wash out, but it might take a couple of days if you get a lot of icing color on your hands. So for the ball size that we need for our ladybug, we want to go with a slightly smaller head. So I'm going to kind of use that same trick that I showed you with the leaf to find out how big of a ball we need. I'm going to do that with the black here.
Tiffany, can you
yeah,
again just move forward a little
forward
bit?
more? Is that better?
That's better. Thank you.
Yep. And now I'm going to use the purple cutter from the set here, which is the third smallest cutter. And this should give us the perfect size that we need for the head. And there we go. So with the red fondant still being pretty fresh and my black fondant is fresh, to attach these, we should just be able to kind of squeeze them together and they should hold. If they don't, you can just take a brush with a little bit of water and you can dab some water on either ball and that will help them to stay together. Now this is not actually a normal paintbrush. Again, like the food writer, you want to make sure that you're using a food safe brush. So this is actually part of a 5-pack of decorator brushes at Michael's. You'll find it right in the food crafting aisle. And then you want to make sure that you don't get this mixed in with your other paint brushes because you only want to use this one with your food. So there's our ladybug. So now what we're going to do is take our leaf. We can just set that on. And we can put our ladybug on like that. Now, if we really want to make sure that he's secured well, we could do a couple of different things. You could take just some buttercream icing, but I would recommend trying to use the same color as the leaf. And you would just put a little dab of icing there before you add your ladybug. What could happen, though, is you might get a little icing kind of scoot out between the ladybug and the leaf. So what I like to use is piping gel. So this also is available at Michael's. It's an edible gel and it doesn't really have a color. You could add an icing color to it if you wanted to, but I just use it just clear, and this way it's not going to show when you use it as an edible glue. So there we have our cute little ladybug. Any questions before we move on to our caterpillar? All right, let's move on then. And this is what we're going to make next. So I'm going to take some of the turquoise blue fondant. You could really make your caterpillar whatever color you want. And I'm just going to roll it in a ball. And the size that I used was pretty much the size of the Ladybug. And again, you could just eyeball it if you want. Or you could do that little trick with the leaf cutters. Again, to get this size, you would just use that orange cutter. And then because I know you guys don't want to sit here and watch me roll a whole bunch of balls, I've got some other ones that are already pre-made. And what we're going to do is get our caterpillar ready to sit on some grass. So I'm going to be using the green icing pouch here. And again, you just want to knead it really well before you go to use it. Take the storage cap off. And remember, there's the round tip that's on there first, and then you'll get to your star tip. So we're going to give our caterpillar some grass to sit on. And to do that, you're just going to start again with the bag straight up and squeeze, stop squeezing, and lift away. And we're just going to pipe a bunch of little stars that sort of looks like grass when you're all done here. Just make sure that you're piping your grass really close together so none of the cupcake shows through. And by doing that, you don't have to actually ice your cupcake smooth with a spatula first. And you'll want to stop squeezing before you pull the bag away. Otherwise, you're going to get really tall grass like that, and then it'll be hard to see the caterpillar. And for the grass, we're just going to do one layer. I know for the other two things that we just piped, we kind of did 2 layers. We're just going to do a single layer of stars for our caterpillar so he doesn't get lost in the grass. So there's that. Then we can start to add our little pieces here, and I'll show you what we do for his cute little head. I'm actually going to use the food writer again to put some eyes and a mouth. Okay, and then we got to give him his little antennas. And to do that, what I'm actually going to use are these flower stamens. Now, these are not edible, but they're safe to use with food. These are available in the food crafting aisle at Michael's. So when you go to use a stamen, you actually kind of have 2 ends in one. So what we can do is cut these down in half, and I'm actually going to cut them a little bit shorter. You could just use regular scissors to cut them, like that. And then these can just poke right in. You don't even need to attach it with any piping gel or anything like that. They'll just stick right in. Okay, and then I think what I'm going to try to do is attach this with water. If that doesn't hold, what we can do is use the piping gel. So there we have our little caterpillar. You can even go a little bit longer if you want. The size balls don't all have to be the same. You can kind of do some larger, some smaller to kind of have a larger head and work your way to a skinnier tail. It's, you know, whatever you want to do. And actually, he's not going to stay up. So what we might need to do is add a little piping gel if that doesn't want to stay. So any questions on our caterpillar or how to pipe grass before we move on to our ice cream?
No questions yet.
Fabulous. Okay, moving right along then. What we are going to do next is I'm going to show you how to core the cupcake using a cupcake corer. So you want the tube end here, and you're just going to put this in the center of your cupcake and just kind of twist it a little bit. And that should go right through to the bottom of your cupcake. Then it pulls out the center here. So I don't know if you can see that. Now we've got a place to stuff our rainbow sprinkles in. And then this just kind of pops out. So you've got a little sample to try while you're decorating if you want. And then I'm going to take some sprinkles. And I actually like to use the other end of the core. And this makes a perfect sprinkle scooper to load up your cupcake with. And actually, this core is almost like having 3 tools in one, because not only can you core your cupcake and use it to spoon out your sprinkles, this end actually works as a spatula too. So if we wanted to spatula ice our cupcake, you could use this end. So it's like 3 tools in one gadget. So this also is available at Michael's. So what we'll do next is we'll just add some icing to this. So we're going to start in the center and just do another one of those swirls. And once we get to the outer edge, we're just going to sort of work our way towards the center again. And there we go. So what I want to show you before we add our ice cream, I've got a cupcake here that is already filled with sprinkles, and I just want to show you when we cut into this. I'm going to try to do this without actually unwrapping the cupcake. So look how fun that is with all these sprinkles inside the cupcake. No one's going to expect that when they go to bite into their cupcake. So any questions on how to fill the cupcake with sprinkles?
We have a question. Can you use an apple core instead if you don't have the Wilton core?
I've never tried an apple core. It might. Anyone else watching ever use an apple core? It might work.
I have not used an apple core.
Okay. Yeah, what I like about this core is it gives you a nice clean cut, and then it actually, you can easily pull that center out because it sticks right inside here. So this to me works really, really well.
And we've got someone that said that they have used an apple core and it worked.
Oh, fabulous. Okay, good to know. Thank you. All right, so what we're going to do next is we're going to make the cone part of our cupcake, if everyone can see that. So what I'm going to do now is show you one other method for coloring your fondant. And this time we're going to start with white. And then I'm going to add a little bit of brown color to it. And by adding just a touch of brown, got some pink in there, that will give us just the shade that we need to make it a cone color. So I just want to knead my fondant a little bit before we go to add the color. And Michael's has a wide variety of the icing colors to choose from. So they make it really easy to get exactly the color that you want for your project. So we'll start out with just a small amount and knead this in, and then we can always add more if we need to. So you kind of just keep pulling it, folding it, twisting it until it's all blended in. So you can see that I added a fair amount of brown, but look how light that it still came out. So that's why when I did the black, I started with a dark color, because it's so much easier to get to that black color if you start with a darker color. All right, so that looks pretty good. So to do our cone, we're actually going to use a round cutter, very much like the leaf set. This just happens to be the round ones. Again, there's 6 to the package, and there's the straight side and the rippled side. We're going to use the straight side. Oops. Dust our surface. And we're going to roll this out to a 1/16 of an inch again. If you find that your fondant is sticking to the roller, you could dust the roller a little bit, or just take your dusting pouch and go lightly over the fondant. Just try to only do that if you absolutely have to, because if you get too much powder on the fondant, it's going to start to dry out. So that looks pretty good. And then we're just going to use this cutter to cut out a circle. And this is actually going to give us 2 cones, because we're only going to use half of this. Before I cut it in half, we're actually going to create the little lines that are typically in a cone. So to do that, I'm just going to take my tapered spatula, start at one end, and very lightly just put some lines in there, the same way that I did the center vein on the leaf. Again, just don't cut too deep, or you might cut right through the fondant, and we don't want to go that far. Once you get your lines across, then you kind of want to go back the other way. So it's almost like a grid effect. You could also use the modeling stick to kind of put your imprint of the lines in, or you could use the fondant trimmer. I just like to use the spatula because it gives you nice straight lines. So that's all set. I don't know if you guys can see that. See how you can see the lines? Okay. So now I'm just going to take my tapered spatula and cut this in half, because we're just going to need 1/2 for our cone. So I'm flipping that over, and then what we're going to do is turn this straight edge into the point of our cone. So I'm just taking the 2 corners and kind of folding them over like this to create a point. And then you might need just a little bit of water to help seal that shut. There we go. Just pinch it a little bit, and if you need to, you can always kind of reshape it with your modeling stick. This one held up pretty nice. So we're just going to put that aside while we do our ice cream. But now that you know how to do the cone, I want to show you something else you can use that technique for. So here is our confetti cupcake, where I've topped it with a party hat. So I made it the same way as our cone. I just didn't put the lines in it. Instead, I put little dots of fondant on for more polka dots, and then I used my star tip to give it a little pom-pom on the top. Okay, so for our ice cream, I'm just going to use some pink fondant here. And you want to start out with a ball that's about maybe 1.25 inches. So it'll end up being in proportion with the little cone that we made. So roll it in a ball.
Tiffany, can you come a little bit forward again?
Yeah, is that better?
That's better, thank you.
Okay. And then I'm going to take my modeling stick And I'm just going to start pulling some of the fondant towards the surface to kind of give it that melting effect. And you don't have to go around the whole ball of fondant, maybe about 3/4, and this seems to be getting a little sticky, so that's where our dusting pouch comes into handy. Just gonna trim some of this off here. That looks pretty good. Now I've lost some of the definition here, so I'm just going to take my modeling stick and kind of press it in to kind of reshape that ball again. And then kind of push my ball forward. So there is our melted ice cream. We're ready to put that on. Let me just make sure that that fits pretty well. So we'll place this on. And then we can add our sprinkles. And you might find that adding a little bit of piping gel is going to help because these sprinkles tend to want to roll off. And there we have our ice cream cone. Are there any questions on the ice cream?
No?
Great. Okay, so
Just
let me
following
just
along.
Good. Let me let you guys know what you can do if you have some leftover fondant. As we talked about before, as long as you wrap it up good, it will store pretty well. So what you would do is, let's say this is all our leftover fondant. You want to take some pure white solid vegetable shortening, and I have some in here. Just take your finger and kind of put a very light coating over your fondant, and that's going to help seal in the moisture so it's not going to dry out so fast. All you need is a real light coating. And I do not recommend using that butter flavored shortening because that has kind of a yellowish color to it, and that color will actually come off on your fondant. So just try to use the pure white. Then wrap this up tightly, and then you'll want to put it in a resealable bag or an airtight container. And as long as you do that, you should get several weeks more out of your leftover fondant. So that is everything that I wanted to show you today. Does anybody have any other questions?
We have a question about if they have leftover icing, how long does it last, and do they need to refrigerate it?
It depends on what kind of icing it is. If you're making homemade icing, if it has any kind of dairy in it, if you used either butter or any kind of milk or cream, you definitely want to refrigerate it. For the icing pouches, you know, you could get several weeks out of the icing pouches. You might want to put them in the refrigerator to preserve them a little bit longer. The shelf life really depends on these once you open them, just based on how you store it and, you know, if the tip is contaminated when it comes in contact with whatever it is that you're decorating. But I've had these last for several weeks after they've been opened.
Okay. We have someone asking, do people eat the fondant?
Absolutely, yep. You can eat the fondant. What'll happen is as it sits, it is going to start to dry a little bit. For larger pieces, you're going to find it's still pretty soft in the center, but for something as thin as like the confetti that we made, it's going to dry not so much that when you bite it, it's going to crunch. The only way I can describe it is, you know, when you take a fresh piece of gum and the outer part of the gum, it's not really hard, but it's not quite as soft as the inside of the gum. That's sort of how fondant is when it dries. One other thing I want to mention that might be helpful. So when we did our little leaf here, I had mentioned that if it's really humid, it's going to take a little bit longer to dry. Sometimes you might let it dry for a few days and it still doesn't dry enough. In climates like that, you can use this gum text. It's just a powder. It's a very fine powder. It is food safe. And if you just mix just a pinch of that into like a tennis ball size of fondant, just knead it in, then that's going to help dry your fondant, so it'll help your shapes hold their shape better. Okay, and if you use the gum text, then your fondant is going to dry a little bit harder, and most people wouldn't eat that decoration. They would kind of just take it off the treat before they eat the treat.
Okay, and then we had another question. You had mentioned earlier that you can make these decorations in advance.
Yeah.
How long in advance can you make them, and how would you store them?
You know, I've made things as much as a month ahead of time. It's just so much more convenient to get all that decorating done before the day that you need it. What I would do though is leave, you know, put it in a container, but leave the lid off until the pieces dry overnight, because if you cover them, they're going to remain soft. So it kind of just depends on what the decoration is. Again, if it's the little flat confetti pieces, that would be okay to keep covered. If they stay soft, it's not a big deal. But if you're looking to do something like that ladybug leaf where you want to give it that dimensional look, you really need to keep the fondant exposed to air. You know, and once it completely dries, you can store it with the cover on. I'd probably still keep it loose though.
Okay. And again, will you remind everyone when the recording for this class will be on michaels.com?
Yeah, it should actually be up sometime later tomorrow. So if you want to go back, if there's any details that you can't remember, you can always go back and watch the recording after tomorrow.
Okay, and then how long will the cupcakes last once they're decorated?
You know, I like my cupcakes within like 3 days. Again, it depends on how you store them. I feel like you don't get quite as long of a shelf life out of cupcakes as you do a regular cake. So I would recommend, so you get that really fresh taste, to try to eat them within 2 to 3 days if you can. You could freeze your cupcakes before you put the icing on and just pull those out of the freezer and add the icing in your decoration the day that you need them. It's a little trickier to try to freeze any leftover cupcakes after they've been decorated. So I don't know that I would recommend that. I would just try to eat them within, you know, 2 to 3 days.
Okay, and then someone asked, what else can you use piping gel for?
Piping gel, in addition to it being like an edible glue, you could also add color to it and use it to pipe messages. A lot of times you'll find that the ice cream stores that do ice cream cakes, they like to use piping gel to pipe the messages on the cake. A really cool water effect is if you add like a royal blue icing color to the piping gel, it really looks like, you know, a water effect. So if you're trying to do maybe something that has like an ocean look, I think we have Shark Week coming up in July, right? So adding blue to piping gel for that makes a really cool base to put your shark in on your cake, your cupcake.
Okay. And what colors can be used for fondant and buttercream? Again, how did you color them?
You could use them with any kind of icing color. You could really use any food color. Again, I would stick with the concentrated gels if you can, because they're not going to change the consistency as much as the food colors that are the liquid form.
Okay.
Anything else?
That's all we have.
Okay, well, I hope you guys enjoyed what I showed you today. And no matter what you end up creating this week, have fun with it. And I wish you sweet success. I hope to see you all again. Bye.
Thanks, Tiffany.